What motivates individuals and organizations to support the work of our public agencies and nonprofits? To further explore that question, I'd like to introduce you to a study known as the 7 Faces of Philanthropy. Because this study on giving to organizations provides great insight into the 7 faces of partnerships that we find with our public lands. Now, these 7 partners range from the repayer, who believes in doing good as a payback in return. The investor we've all met, doing good is good for business. Well, there's the socialite, and we find them at our public lands because doing good is fun. There's the communitarian, who believes that doing good makes good sense. And then there's the devout, organizations and groups that are really moved by a moral belief and a connection with America's great outdoors. And they base their actions and their support on their belief system and their values. Well, then we have the altruist, who's a little different than the devout. And the altruist believes that it's an individual act to contribute to the community. It feels right to support our public lands. And finally, we have the dynasts, those families that for generations have had a hand in shaping the conservation and environmental ethic of the United States and in supporting the communities that are dependent upon our public lands. So let's talk a little bit more about this repayer. You probably know more than one. If you thought about it, let me give you a few characteristics of who fits the repayer characteristic. First of all, they're people who have direct experience with your public agency. They're very loyal. They want to help not out of a sense of being recognized or because they necessarily see an urgent need. The repayers want to help because they know how things are supposed to work. They don't need to give you a lot of detailed information about what role they should play. They're going to want to have direct involvement in the day-to-day operations of the work that you're doing together. And they're not really interested in having a lot of plaques or recognition ceremonies for the work that they've done. Then we have the investor, this doing good for business, those business interests from the private sector who see a win-win situation. Boy, that's a term we've heard a lot. Effectiveness and efficiency, public-private partnerships. And there are win-wins of partnerships based on the investor. Our trouble may be is that we apply that term to far too many faces of partnership. When you're working with an investor, they too are not going to want to be involved in the day-to-day workings of a project. They're going to be methodical in making decisions about financing or sending teams of business employees to support the work that you're doing. They want the project work to be effective. They want it to be well thought out. And very importantly, they do not want an emotional appeal for why they should be supporting our public lands. You're much better off basing your appeal on what society needs, what their employees living in that community may need, or what science will tell you will be a benefit from their involvement in supporting our public lands. They definitely do use advisors. They do take advantage of tax write-offs. And finally, they like to be recognized. The socialite, the group that likes to have fun. Well, who doesn't like to have fun? Let's think about the backcountry horsemen, or maybe it's your local friends group. And they do a fabulous job of bringing people together annually for events that draws in the community, that raises funds for the work that you're doing in restoration or capital construction or education, outdoor recreation. It's important when you're working with an individual or group that's socially oriented that you have time to work with them. All the conversations can't be about how well the restoration work is going. They want you to see them as an individual and as a group. And when you plan project work for them, they want to make sure that you have some time in there for the campfire, for the cookout, for the actual horseback ride. And they do want to be recognized, but not so much publicly as amongst their peers. That's the most appropriate form of recognition for the socialite. The communitarian. Now, what's all this about? Doing good makes sense? Well, the communitarian, think of your local chamber of commerce. Communitarians are community leaders. They get involved and work with our public agencies. They think long term. When they desire recognition, it's not personal recognition so much as that they want to highlight issues that should be shared community values, and they want to pass on the values. So communitarians are very much going to be taking a look at what different leaders in the community have to say about this work with our public lands and the nonprofits. They are seeking to influence, and not for ill. They're seeking to influence because they want their community to come together and to support our public lands and to pass on those values to current as well as future generations. The devout. Now, I know that each of you have worked with at least one organization that gets its strength and energy from a belief of what should be happening on our public lands, whether that's the National Wildlife Federation, the Sierra Club, some would say the Society of American Foresters, that there are organizations who are focused on this moral obligation and tie that we have to the land, whether they are advocates for conservation and multiple use or protectionism and environmentalism. And it's important when you're working with folks that are devout that you are very clear in creating an understanding of the work that you're going to do together. They will give you their time, their talent, and their treasure, but what they want most of all is for their values to be shared. They typically don't need professional advisors. They are very much about rolling up their sleeves and getting involved and staying with you for the long term. And just like family relationships, they don't mind spatting with you and having a quarrel if they disagree with you in a direction that you're headed. Now you have the altruist. Doing good feels right. Now, the altruist often can be found in working with our public lands amongst local landowners. They often are permittees, have a long-standing relationship with the public lands, and they see the subsequent comings and goings of generations of federal land managers. So they'll watch over you, and when you have a problem that you need to address, and then you need other people in the community to come together, it's the altruists that you reach out to. They work quietly. They do not want to be publicly recognized. They have a strong desire to solve problems, and they're really not interested so much in the fine details of day-to-day work, but in seeing the stewardship of public lands move forward. Now you have the dynast, and that's the last of the 7 of our faces of both philanthropy and partnership. So who's the dynast? Well, the dynast are the Murdoch Trusts and the Ford Foundations. The foundation community plays a very strong role in this regard, but so do our local counties and cities associated with federal public lands. They are the institutions and organizations that are going to be there generation after generation focused on the stewardship of public lands. So the people can come and go, but that county is always going to be tied to that national monument, that national forest, that national recreation area. So the county becomes a dynast. And you know, it's an interesting thing about, you can talk with me about the important work that my grandparents did, and I can appreciate that, But if you want to work with me, then you ought to know what I'm concerned about today, as well as the contributions that my grandparents made. So that's the best way to approach the dynast. Understand the history of these foundations or these county organizations that have been with our public lands over multiple generations. But make sure that you're sitting down with the current leadership and you're finding out what they are most concerned about. Where do they want to expend their energies? What does their strategic plan say? That's who you want to move forward with and on those topics. So respect for the elders and a renewed faith and commitment to work with current leadership. Now, what's interesting about this philanthropic study is that they also looked at word choice. Say your responsibility is to prepare remarks for the state director or Washington program officer who's coming out to talk with folks in your community. And you're thinking about the work that you're doing in biomass or trail development or water quality. And you're thinking about the partners who are going to attend that day, and perhaps some of them are going to be recognized on the podium as remarks are being made. And you think about the win-win situation and effectiveness and efficiency, which is great for those members in the audience who are from the investment community, those business interests that are great partners. But what about the repayer? What about the retirees that show up, the long-term volunteers? What words are going to resonate most with them? They want to hear about how people have come together to pay back because it's in their heritage, that it's important to support each other, that these public lands gave them an opportunity when they were younger and raising a family, and they want that same opportunity now for their children and their grandchildren. What about the communitarian? You know, the folk from the Chamber of Commerce who want the whole community come together because they're concerned about what the effects of drought may be over the next 5 years and how we have to change the way we're developing our land use planning to support the need for water in our own community. They don't want to hear about win-win as much as they want to hear about civic responsibility and accountability. Now, if you're the socialite, you're hearing about people repaying and people win-winning, and you're hearing about accountability. Well, what about all of this is going to be fun? What is it that's going to bring community together and bind us together so that we have more than a moral obligation or business interests? We can build the ties that bind through fellowship. And then there's that altruist who needs to know that there's social responsibility and a sense of purpose, that that one group or that one individual can come forward and make the difference in the stewardship of our public lands. So when you're thinking about who you're talking to in that group, who the remarks that you're preparing for your colleague to give or you're going to give at the public meeting, think about the 7 faces of philanthropy that are in that audience. Who amongst the group would consider this call to action to be much more urgent if you talked about it in terms of a family tradition or the leadership that the county has played over the years in supporting these public lands? Who amongst the group would really respond to several lines that talk about a sense of duty, a sense of moral obligation to our community who relies upon these public lands? So it's about word choice. It's about thinking about what the motives and attitudes are. Often when I'm asked questions about working in partnership, people will say, well, won't everyone want a big banner with their name across it? And Liz, we can't put a big banner with the name across it for everybody who's helping us. They don't all want recognition, but they all want communication that speaks to them intellectually and emotionally. And on that note, I will leave you with my final insight about the 7 faces of partnership, and that has to do with the power of testimonial. When they conducted this study, they not only defined these characteristics of how to engage and communicate with these 7 faces, They found that all 7 phases of partnership responded overwhelmingly to testimonial. So when you're thinking about your next event, or the next posting on your Facebook page, or the next meeting that you're going to have with community leaders, think about who should be standing aside you, or who should be writing that post, or who should be joining you at the podium to talk about why the stewardship of these public lands is so important. If it comes from the rancher, if it comes from the local chapter of the Nature Conservancy, if it comes from a local landowner, if it comes from the secretary to the Chamber of Commerce, they will be much more compelling in their community than any manager in federal uniform.